Well, this week's deep dive takes us into some pretty choppy waters.
Yeah.
Our, let's just say, unconventional president is
Mhm.
back in the Oval Office. And, well, his first week back has been eventful. That's one way to put it.
Eventful. Yeah,
Yeah.
I think that might be understating it. There's been a flurry of activity and pronouncements. A lot of them have raised eyebrows, to say the least.
Yeah, absolutely. One of the most alarming moments was his statement about wanting to clean out Gaza. It seems to be echoing some pretty unsettling ideas about Palestinian refugees that he's had going way back. So today we're diving deep into what experts and journalists are saying about this wild first week and what it might mean going forward. We've got a whole stack of articles to go through, and they don't hold back.
No, they don't. We've got pieces from The Atlantic, The Associated Press, even Scientific American. Greenland's prime minister wants the nightmare to end, for example, digs into the president's renewed interest in buying Greenland. Seems to be causing quite a stir. Then there's Trump's Palestinian refugee idea falls flat with Jordan, confounds Senate ally, takes a look at his proposal to resettle refugees in Egypt and Jordan.
Right, and we can't forget about the connections that some sources are making between the president's reality TV past and his current political style.
Oh yeah, some are even calling it the apprentice presidency.
Okay, so let's get into it. This whole reality TV presidency thing is pretty mind-boggling. It's almost like those boardroom showdowns are playing out on the global stage, only now the stakes are way higher.
Yeah. And several sources are pointing to that link, suggesting that The Apprentice may have been a training ground, maybe unintentionally, but a training ground for his political style. Shaping how he sees power, how he negotiates, and also how he can use the media.
Like, he's still playing the role, still in character, but the boardroom's now the Oval Office.
Yeah, and that idea of the attention economy comes into play here. In this world today, this hyper-connected world that we live in, attention is like a currency. And the president seems to understand that, using it to control the narrative and basically dominate the news cycle.
Just like reality TV, right? Thrives on that drama, that spectacle.
Yep, think about it, the catchphrases, the pronouncements, the persona. It's all crafted to grab and hold our attention, whether there's substance behind it or not.
And social media has become his ultimate platform for that, hasn't it? He can bypass all the traditional outlets. He can control the message, connect directly with his supporters.
Yeah, and the apprentice president takes it a step further. It suggests that the president might be an empty shell, almost a blank slate that supporters can project their own beliefs and desires onto.
So less about what he believes, more about what his supporters want to believe.
Yeah, that's the theory. They avoid taking responsibility for their views because they're seeing what they want to see in him, and he echoes those sentiments back and it reinforces their beliefs.
That's a scary thought, especially when you consider some of the more extreme views within his base.
It raises a lot of questions about leadership, the media's influence, and how our political discourse is changing in this age of information overload.
It really does. So we've got this empty shell theory, and then we come across this article, The Apprentice. Trump biopic is riddled with perfect examples of a man with the dark triad of personality traits, connecting his behavior to something called the dark triad of personality traits: Machiavellianism, narcissism, and psychopathy.
That's a fascinating framework from psychology, and it can help explain some of the president's more troubling tendencies.
Okay, so break that down for us. What does that mean in plain English?
Okay, so Machiavellianism. Think cunning, manipulation, disregard for morality. It's about achieving your goals no matter what it takes. And the article uses examples from The Apprentice to show how this might play out.
So it's better to be feared than loved, kind of thing.
Exactly. Then there's narcissism, inflated sense of self-importance, needs constant admiration, lacks empathy. Article points to scenes from the film that show a really grandiose view of himself, a sense of entitlement, and a willingness to exploit others.
And finally, we have psychopathy, which I think is often misunderstood. It's not just about serial killers. It's about impulsivity, lack of remorse, a disregard for the well-being of others.
Right. And the article connects that to things from the film: impulsive decisions, lack of empathy, even toward people he supposedly considers close.
So we're seeing a possible connection between these dark triad traits and what we're seeing from the president. But here's where it gets really interesting. The article suggests that these traits might actually contribute to his political success.
It's almost a paradox, isn't it? In a system that often rewards ruthlessness, self-promotion, a lack of empathy, well, these traits can be advantageous.
So maybe this cutthroat reality TV world was the perfect training ground for politics after all.
It's a disturbing thought, but a thought worth considering. What kind of leaders are we rewarding? What does that say about us?
Okay, so we've gone through this reality TV presidency idea and this dark triad concept. Now let's switch gears. Let's talk about something a little lighter, but no less strange. The president wants to buy Greenland. Remember that?
Oh, yes, Greenland Redux. His fascination with acquiring this massive island is back. Greenland's prime minister wants the nightmare to end. That Atlantic article. It gives us a glimpse into what's happening.
And the prime minister, Mutagerdia, he doesn't seem too thrilled, does he?
I think that's putting it mildly, trying to project calm, reassure the people, but you can sense the underlying tension there, the frustration.
Well, I can't blame him. Imagine the most powerful person in the world suddenly obsessed with buying your country.
Created a strange atmosphere in Greenland, this sudden attention. The article describes a mix of reactions. Amusement, flattery even, but also resistance. Strong resistance.
Like, thanks, but no thanks.
Exactly. And it's important to understand why Greenland is suddenly so relevant. Its location is strategic, it has vast natural resources, it's a potential prize in this global power game.
So lots of countries are probably watching this closely.
Absolutely. But as the article points out, becoming part of the U.S. could have some real downsides, risks for Greenland. They could lose their autonomy, their unique culture, maybe even face environmental exploitation.
It's a complex situation, far-reaching implications. Perfect example of how the president's actions, these seemingly impulsive actions, can have a ripple effect across the globe.
A reminder that even in a hyper-connected world, there's often a disconnect between intention and consequence.
Yeah. It really is. It reminds us that we live in a world where actions have consequences. Yeah. And sometimes those consequences are unintended. And speaking of unintended consequences, let's turn our attention to something a little more volatile, Gaza. The president made these pretty concerning remarks about wanting to clean out Gaza. And this is part of his plan for resettling Palestinian refugees. Trump's Palestinian refugee idea falls flat with Jordan, confounds Senate ally. That article, it really gets into the details.
It does. It's been met with a lot of condemnation, this proposal, even from the president's allies. And it's really important to understand the context. Gaza is still recovering from the recent conflict. There's widespread devastation, and tensions are running high.
And into this powder keg, the president throws this idea of Egypt and Jordan absorbing Palestinian refugees. Doesn't exactly sound like a recipe for peace and stability.
No, not at all. And the language that he used, that phrase, cleaning out, it's alarming. It evokes, images of forced displacement, ethnic cleansing even. And those ideas have no place in diplomacy today.
And even Senator Lindsey Graham, a pretty staunch supporter of the president, seems surprised by it.
Yeah, Graham expressed a lot of skepticism about the feasibility and just the wisdom of this proposal. He pointed out that it's just not practical to expect millions of Palestinians to uproot their lives and move to other countries.
Right. And what about Egypt and Jordan? Were they on board with this plan?
No, they weren't. Both pushed back. They cited concerns about destabilizing their own countries and the wider region. And they also highlighted, the historical and the legal complexities of the whole Palestinian refugee situation, particularly the right of return, which is a cornerstone of any potential peace agreement.
It's a reminder that words have power. The president's words, his actions, they can inflame tensions, they can derail any diplomatic efforts, and they can undermine the stability of entire regions.
Absolutely. It's a real example of the dangers, the potential dangers of impulsive foreign policy decisions.
Okay, so from a geopolitical mess to a potential constitutional crisis, let's talk about the president's executive order. He's trying to end birthright citizenship for certain groups. That New York Times opinion piece, Trump doesn't get to decide what the Constitution means. It makes some really strong arguments against this, legally and morally.
Yeah, this executive order is really controversial because it contradicts the 14th Amendment. And the 14th Amendment clearly states that anyone born in the U.S. is a citizen. Doesn't matter what their parents' immigration status is.
So he's trying to rewrite the Constitution with an executive order.
Yeah, and the article highlights that this isn't the first time. It's a pattern. The president has repeatedly shown that he's willing to disregard a legal precedent, to challenge the separation of powers, and to act unilaterally, without regard for the rule of law.
It's that I alone can fix it mentality, but taken to an extreme.
Exactly. And the article makes a really important point. The Constitution is more than just a legal document. It's a social and political one, too. And its meaning is shaped by how we, the people, interpret it and apply it.
So it's not enough to just rely on the courts to uphold the Constitution. We have a responsibility to defend it, to speak out against any abuses of power, to hold our leaders accountable.
It's a reminder that democracy requires participation, active participation, not just passive acceptance.
So we've talked about a lot. The reality TV presidency, the dark triad of personality traits, Greenland, Gaza, birthright citizenship, even the foundation of our democracy. But one question keeps coming up for me. How does he keep his followers?
With all the chaos, the contradictions, the scandals.
That's the question, isn't it? It's puzzled a lot of people. A couple of the articles we have today offer some insights. Trump's personality cult plays a part in his political appeal from Scientific American. It dives into the psychology of it all.
You mean it goes beyond just policy agreements or ideology? It's something deeper.
Yeah. They suggest that. They point to this concept of a personality cult, where a charismatic leader becomes almost like an object of devotion. You a savior, a protector, someone who can cut through the noise and fix everything. And they found something kind of interesting. His most loyal supporters, they score very high on conscientiousness, a personality trait usually linked to order and discipline, following the rules.
Seems counterintuitive, right? But the authors say that for these supporters, it's not about following rules, it's about following the leader.
So their self-discipline, their need for structure, it's channeled into loyalty to him.
Exactly. And this connects with the article, How Reality TV Helps Explain Trump's Success. It argues that he's created this persona that's both relatable and transgressive. He's the guy who says what he thinks, breaks the rules, doesn't care what the elites think.
So it appeals to people who feel disenfranchised, forgotten by the system.
Exactly. He offers them a sense of belonging, a feeling of empowerment, even a thrill of defiance. It's like they're part of a movement that's challenging the establishment, even if that establishment is, well, the very foundation of our democracy.
It's a powerful mix, and one that's been really hard to counteract.
It raises a lot of questions about leadership, the role of the media, and the future of our political discourse in a world where attention and emotion often overshadow facts and reason.
Yeah, it is a lot. It's almost like we're living in some kind of reality show gone wrong. The cameras might not be rolling 24/7, but the drama, the outrageous stuff he says, that constant need for attention, it's exhausting.
It is, and concerning on so many levels, especially when you consider, the real-world impact of it all. His actions, his words, they have consequences that go way beyond entertainment.
So let's take a step back here. What have we learned from this deep dive into the president's first week back? It's been a whirlwind.
Yeah, it has. We started by looking at the connections, between his reality TV past and his political style. That he's using those same tactics that made him a reality TV star, the attention grabbing, the spectacle, not caring about the facts to get ahead in politics.
Right, and then we explored that dark triad, those personality traits that some psychologists say are at play here. Machiavellianism, narcissism, psychopathy. It's a pretty sobering thought that those traits might actually be helping him succeed.
It makes you question what we think about leadership, doesn't it? Makes you wonder what kind of society rewards those qualities in a leader.
We also look at some of his policies, his proposals, like cleaning out Gaza and wanting to buy Greenland.
Right, and those show a real lack of understanding of the complexities, of geopolitics and just not thinking about the consequences of those actions.
And then there's that executive order, trying to end birthright citizenship. Basically trying to go around the Constitution and, eroding the norms and the institutions that our democracy is based on.
And we've seen this before, right? Throughout his time in office, a disregard for the rule of law, pushing the limits of his authority, and constantly needing to assert his dominance.
But maybe the most confusing thing is how popular he still is. All the chaos, the controversy, he doesn't seem to care much about truth or decency, and yet people are still fiercely loyal to him.
It's hard to wrap your head around, isn't it? Those articles we talked about, they offer some perspectives, from psychology, like the idea of a personality cult where a charismatic leader becomes the object of devotion.
And the idea that he's an empty shell that supporters project their own beliefs onto.
It's a pretty unsettling thought, isn't it? Like he's a blank slate for people's anger, their resentment.
It's overwhelming, to be honest. Feels like we're in a political thriller, but the stakes are way too real.
It's a difficult time for sure. But even with all the uncertainty, the anxiety, there's also opportunity, a chance to really engage with our democracy, to hold our leaders accountable, and to fight for what we believe in.
So what does that look like? How can we actually make a difference?
Well, we have to stay informed. Can't just tune out or become complacent. We need to understand the issues, think critically about the information that's out there.
And we have to be engaged, right? Vote, Contact our representatives, be involved in local government, support organizations that are fighting for what we believe in.
Right. And maybe most importantly, we have to have those tough conversations with people who don't agree with us. We have to listen, empathize, try to find some common ground.
It's easy to feel overwhelmed, powerless, but we're not. Our actions, our voices, our choices, they all matter.
The future isn't set in stone. We shape it by what we do, by what we don't do right now.
Well, that's a lot to think about. This deep dive has been, well, it's been eye-opening. It reminds us that we're living in a crazy time and that each of us has a part to play in what happens next.
Absolutely. Stay informed, stay engaged, and stay hopeful.
Thanks for joining us on this deep dive. Until next time.